inspiration.
Good evening, church.
Good evening.
Well, my scripture will be coming from Ephesians chapter 6, verses 1 through 3. And it reads, "Children, obey your parents as believers in the Lord. Obey them because it's the right thing to do. Scripture says, honor your father and mother. That is the first commandment that has a promise. Then things will go well with you. You will live a long time on earth."
Amen.
My topic today will be obedience to your parents brings obedience to Christ.
Amen.
It is a high privilege to be saved by grace. While we can never earn our salvation, it does come with responsibilities. We have a calling to live up to. What we do or don't do is a reflection on Jesus, either good or bad. Paul wrote this letter to a young church set in the heart of a pagan or non-Christian society. Ephesus was a thriving commercial center, but in order for the church to grow, its members needed to know how to live, how to stand apart as different and yet still be able to influence their society. Paul covers a broad spectrum of conduct and relationships. For every part of our life is a part of our calling. He tells us to be imitators of God, a task that would be impossible except for one thing: we are not alone. We have the Spirit in our inner being, and we have the protection of the full armor of God. It's up to us, however, to use what we have been given. Paul's letter instructs how to do that. In Ephesians chapter 6, verses 1 through 3, Paul instructs us how we as children are to follow God's plan for our lives by honoring our parents. Verse 1 says, "Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right." Verse 2 says, "Honor your mother and father, which is the first commandment with a promise." Verse 3 says, "That it may go well with you, and that you may enjoy long life on the earth." This goes to teach us that we should obey our parents, which will bring blessings to our life even at a young age. While obedience is directed more at children, honor is something that still applies to adult children as well. We should all know that if we are obedient and follow God's plan in the home as a child, that it will bring us a life lived with prosperity and happiness. Can I read that one more time? I said sometimes we should all know that if we are obedient and follow God's plan in the home as a child, that it will bring us a life lived with prosperity and happiness. Sometimes we may feel as if our parents are being mean and unreasonable. However, if we can learn to obey our earthly parents when they tell us to do something the first time, in time we will be able to obey our Heavenly Father the first time He asks us or tells us to do something. Here are some examples of people who showed obedience to Christ in the Bible. First, we have Jesus' friends. 1 John chapter 2, verses 3 through 6. Verse 3 says, "We know that we have come to know Him if we obey His commands." Verse 4 says, "The man who says, 'I know Him,' but does not do what He commands is a liar, and the truth is not God's love is truly made complete in him. This is how we know we are in him. Verse 6 says, whoever claims to live in him must walk as Jesus did. The Bible tells is that we show our love for God by obeying his commands. 1 John chapter 5, verse 3, and John 14, chapter 14, verses 23 says, Jesus considered his purpose here on earth to do his Father's work. John chapter 6, verse 38 says, one of God's commands is for children to obey their parents. Ephesians chapter 6, verse 1, and Colossians chapter 3, verse 20 says, just as God was pleased with Jesus for doing his will, God is also pleased with children who follow his instructions, obeying him and their parents. Another example of obedience is Jonah. He had to learn the hard way. Jonah chapter 1 and 2 says, he gave Jonah a job to do. He wanted Jonah to go to the city of Nineveh and warn the people that God was planning to discipline them because of their evil behavior. But instead of doing what God asked, Jonah, he ran away. He joined some sailors on a boat and headed for Tarshish, thus being disobedient. But God knew where Jonah was and chose to discipline him. When God sent a frightening storm, Jonah realized the storm was his fault. Jonah told the sailors to throw him overboard to save their lives. Instead of letting Jonah drown, God sent a big fish to swallow him. Jonah spent 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of a fish, which was like having a long time out in a very smelly place. When Jonah was in the fish, he prayed and told God that he was sorry for not obeying. God let Jonah out of the fish and gave him another chance. This time, Jonah was ready to obey God. He went and told the people of Nineveh that God wanted them to stop doing wrong. This is very similar to how our parents do us when we disobey them. Our belly of the fish may be timed out in our rooms or punishment by taking away our games and TV privileges. Much like Jonah, when we are being punished, it gives us time to think about the wrongs we have done and realize that we need to correct our behaviors and obey our parents in order for us to regain our privileges. In Jonah's case, obey God. Our parents teach us that in order for us to get the things that we like and want, we must obey them. This is also true of God. He wants us to know that in order to follow his plan for our lives and live a blessed life, we must obey. We must be obedient to our parents. Again, it is up to us to use what we have been given. Children, never stop obeying your parents because they care for you and they want the best for your life, just as Jesus did.